All right, welcome everyone. I see folks filtering in. I'll give a few minutes for folks to get in, but we're just really honored to have y'all. So thank you for joining us. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm gonna get started. Hello everyone. My name is Kania, and on behalf of Logix Magazine, the first Black, queer, and Asian critical tech magazine, I'm excited to welcome you to the first installment of our Logix Speaker Series. This 10-part series of virtual public events will reflect the relevant transnational tech conversations from people and communities doing deeply important work, but too often subjected to institutional marginalization. Running every Wednesday from April 3rd to June 5th, this series will center transnational voices and perspectives essential to thinking critically about technology. We're excited to be featuring organizers and poets and artists and scholars from Sudan, Palestine, Kashmir, and more, all of whom reflect the varied frequencies of Logic's vision, helping us make critical tech conversations more accessible and develop a shared lexicon for the future we seek to create. Thank you for joining us for today's event titled On Sudan, the Affordances of Social Media in a Time of War. I'm excited to introduce our speakers, including Dinan Alasad, who was born and raised in Khartoum, who's a writer and mathematician who's interested in documenting and immortalizing truth. She writes to an audience of Sudanese women and others who relate at her Substack, which I will link in the chat. And I'm also excited to introduce Sarah El Hassan, who is a Sudanese American writer and activist who's been providing daily coverage of the war in Sudan across various social media platforms. I'll also be linking her Instagram in the chat as well. So, drawing on 9+ years as organizers and translators in the world of Sudanese social media activism, Dinan and Sara will discuss the ways in which the evolution of social media and algorithmic platform mediation have structured documentation and organizing efforts throughout the ongoing war in Sudan. Given their accessibility and use among Sudanese people, social media sites like Twitter serve as archives to atrocities that aren't gathered elsewhere. They're also a place where the community organizes and distributes mutual aid. In the midst of misinformation campaigns and telecom blackouts, Al-Assad and Al-Hassan will be in conversation about how fraught tech infrastructure shapes the past, present, and potential futures of Sudan. And with that, I'm excited to pass it off to Sara and Dinan. Thank y'all again for joining us today, and you can take it away.
Thank you, Kania.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Sarah.
Hi, Dinan.
I knew this was going to happen over Zoom, but in my head, I thought we were going to be sitting on armchairs, maybe a little shy. But here we are. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I recently I wrote this article with one of my friends, Ola, and I thought that it was very helpful for us to introduce في البداية how at the beginning. I will try my best to speak English throughout this, but I thought it was very useful at the beginning to speak about how we know each other because I feel like it gives really important context and also shows people who are not Sudanese how we operate as Sudanese women and just the context for
Yeah.
operating. But I couldn't remember how I know the ways we know each other, but I couldn't remember which one was the first one because I remember hearing you on the radio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that at all. I
Yeah.
was thinking of the open mic nights
Mhm.
that we had in Khartoum. I think that's my first recollection of you. But my memory is shot and time is a social construct anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, I think we were brought together
Mhm.
through these open mic nights that we used to organize in Khartoum, that were, I think, maybe the first space where I felt truly accepted
Mhm.
and also like where I felt my full faceted Sudanese identity
Mhm.
reflected back to me in other people and in their work.
Mhm.
Um, my first impression of you was impressed. That was my first. That's what I remember clearly. I think that's the memory that cuts through. Like, oh, and I mean, I don't want to expose us here, but the age gap is pretty large between me and Dinan. But I just remember being like, okay, like impressed, pleasantly surprised. So
That's
yeah,
funny.
I'm not sure.
I think I came to the open mic that you guys used to organize because of the fact that I was just such a huge fan because I listened to you on the radio because Sad, for
That's
those of you who
why.
don't know, Sada was on the radio, and anyone who was stuck in rush hour in the morning in Khartoum would listen on the way there and on the way back, by the way. And so that was one of the reasons why I started coming to the open mic. And if it wasn't for Nas with notepads, I wouldn't be writing today. Like I don't think you understand the scale because
That's crazy.
I'd just be working my 9 to 5 and going about my business if it wasn't for Nas with notepads. Like that is actually such an important space. And I think then there was also a really, and this like leads into my first question or like my first area of discussion, but because there was not that much to do in Khartoum at the time, like in 2010s, very, very little to do. Like الناس يتلموا 3 you get a kasha. Like the raids were happening. Like
The
there
raids
was
were
no,
raiding. They were
yeah,
currently
exactly.
raiding.
So people were online. That like Twitter, I remember at the time was really, really active. Sudani Twitter was serious. Like that
Yeah.
was that was a platform. I feel like the old heads had not the old heads, Malish, the elders had their forums. There was a lot of online forums. They had actual real life websites,
Yeah.
had like a Nafida and Sudanese online and so on. And then
Yeah.
for us it was Twitter.
Twitter.
Sudani
Hmm.
Twitter used to have its like the Sudani Twitter glory days. I'll never forget them. Um and
It was
yeah,
a full-fledged community. It was
yeah,
a full-fledged community, yeah. And I
yeah,
think,
absolutely.
compared to Facebook, it was definitely a place with a lot more freedom of thought, I
Yeah.
think, and like diversity of thought. And
Mhm,
that's what drew people to it.
mhm. Absolutely. I agree. So that leads me to my first the first thing I wanted to discuss. I think when I think like to where we're at now with social media and how we use it as Sudanese people and how you use it, like Kenia introduced you collect so much news every day and compile it and share it. But before that, like what got us on Twitter and what were we doing there before it kind of became a a way of organizing and mutual aid and citizen journalism. Because personally, I as much as we ended up using Twitter for a lot of activist work and citizen journalism, I think initially we were on Twitter like we were there for the antics. I think we were
Yeah.
there to joke.
For the giggle, for the kiki,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, as you're asking the question, I'm like, again, trying to recall. I've been on Twitter for a very long time. And in the beginning, it was a very personal purpose. It
Yeah.
was just to pass the time, to shoot your random thoughts into, into the ether, and not think about it again, and not, and it have it be inconsequential, just a place to
Mhm.
sort of like say whatever
Yeah.
and pass the time. And that very quickly changed.
Mhm.
I think we were all very inspired by um, the Arab Spring and how Egypt. I mean, uh, again, my personal, like, the first memory that comes to mind is seeing Egyptians organize on Twitter in such a like unique way,
Mhm.
and being inspired by that. But yeah, but in the beginning it was definitely a personal, just a personal thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Funnily enough, my account started with so my account on Twitter is BS on Blast. That's my handle. And I had a daily thing where, like, a daily tweet where I would blast some BS. And it mostly had to do with some sort of social commentary, right?
Mhm.
Some sort of social aspect, uh, pointing out some social aspect of Sudan that I thought, or Sudanese society that I thought deserve to be thought about or considered differently, changed, whatever. So in that sense, I think fate would have had fate had me moving in that direction
Mhm.
of of activism, of online activism without recognizing it as such.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel like it was inevitable. Because and but I think it's also very interesting because when Western newspapers and like people, come to you, people slide into your DMs and then they write an article and they make it seem like you were on Twitter for the sole purpose of like
Oh yeah.
activism. It's just like, no, I actually ended up here. And that's such an important fact because we're not activists. This is not our career path. We're just normal people. And then the circumstance
Yes.
made us have to do this because
I
no one else
quote
is doing
you
it.
I quote you all the time, Dinan. Dinan is the first person that I know of to say, I'm not an activist, I'm just a person who was forced to do this because, the alternative is absent, because
Yeah.
the people who should be doing this or the
Mhm.
the entities that should be handling this are
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
And I thought that was so powerful because it's true. The way we all came together was not through a lofty purpose, was not through our own aspirations to be activists. It was simply out of necessity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the need to translate things as well because nobody was doing it, and then they would blame, and to this day they're still doing this, blaming the fact that the news is in Sudanese Arabic, which is not translatable. So you can't auto-translate Sudanese Arabic, which is I think a good thing. But that is related to a whole other conversation about how I think gatekeeping is important. But then we need to manually translate it, and that's what we were doing. At least that's how I
Yeah,
started translating things that were happening on the ground and getting coverage. And I think also it allowed us to get coverage from other areas in Sudan because we
yeah.
had absolutely no clue what was happening outside of Khartoum because of the fact that, we know how Television Sudan is. We know how difficult it is to speak your mind on the radio, on TV, on a newspaper. So I think social media and Twitter specifically was one of the first times where I was hearing firsthand what was actually happening in Darfur, what was actually happening in Kordofan. Like I
Hmm.
was hearing from people there, young people who were on the platform for the same reasons as me, I imagine. But there was such a distance between us. I feel like I knew more about what was happening in like London than I knew about what was happening in neighboring
Oh,
states.
definitely, for sure, for sure. I mean, I'm just to put it in context for people. So when the first time the Sudanese people started using uh, Twitter in particular for this organizing work, like I said, post, the Egyptian Revolution, the Arab Spring, was in, I want to say 2011 or 2012.
Mhm.
And please excuse me if those dates are a little bit off, but um, that's the first time, like Dinan said, that I felt like I was seeing perspectives from outside of Khartoum. I mean,
Mhm.
even like before that, like I said, Twitter was being used for me as a personal just outlet. And so I didn't have the reach. It was just kind of I'm following my friends. I wasn't really following much of anyone who I didn't know. Um, but with the first uprising in Sudan, the first protest in Sudan, I think that's when I started seeing perspectives from outside of Khartoum for the first time. And
Mhm.
Sudan at the time, certainly, was a largely disconnected, almost segregated country, right? By design. The regime since 2003 and before was raging wars in marginalized areas of the country, didn't want people in the center and the capital to know what was happening, wanted to control the narrative. And so that information was just not accessible. And
Mhm.
what it created was a culture of denial, right?
Mhm.
Of people being like, well, that's not happening because I'm not seeing it in the news, because I'm not
Mhm.
experiencing it myself.
Mhm.
And the government is telling me, or the news is telling me that this is propaganda.
Mhm.
And so when you start having these uprising 2012, 2013, 2016, you start hearing more and more from outside the capital. And it was an eye opener, but still there was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of uh, suspicion of those voices.
Mhm.
But by the revolution, it had become it had exploded, right? This, like I said, diversity of thought and opinion and experience was all over the app. We had more access to it, and we were paying attention to it. And I think that really changed the course of things. It made people certainly in the center aware of what was happening and a little bit more like take a step back and think, oh, I have to reevaluate.
Yeah.
what I've, what this struggle is about, what I've considered Sudan to be. Like there's a multitude of experiences that we need to take into account now.
Mhm.
And that was one of the more amazing parts of social media organizing.
Mhm.
Uh, for me, I thought it was really important because of how controlled the narrative was, because of how limited the scope of uh, what we consider to be the Sudanese experience and the Sudanese experience in revolution and in uprising was, that I felt the need to highlight those
Mhm.
highlight those voices, but also highlight that news. And
Mhm.
so that manifested in like doing daily threads of just talking about what was happening outside of Khartoum, especially during the revolution. I think that was important because the movement in Khartoum was so huge, right?
Mhm.
But it was equally, I mean, the revolution started outside of Khartoum. It
Mhm.
started in a Damascene and Blue Nile state.
Mhm.
The first huge spark of the revolution was in Adbara in River
Yeah.
Nile state. These are all places, that are removed from Khartoum and from the narrative of Khartoum. But very quickly, the
Mhm.
focus turned to just what was happening in Khartoum. So I really thought it was important to make it a point to show that this thing is national. This
Mhm.
movement is national. It's across the country, and that was also being reflected in international media as well, where the focus was on what was happening in Khartoum.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Twitter really gave us the opportunity to uh, reflect the full picture in a way that we weren't able to before,
Yeah.
or in a much more widespread way, a much more widely accepted way than before.
Mhm. Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I think the news outlets are always so committed to watering down the story.
Yeah.
And especially I feel like Western news outlets love a one-liner. They love a
Oh
one-dimensional story.
yeah.
They love, assigning an underdog and then like, but this is not, it's not Marvel, this is real life and it's so complicated.
Right.
And there's so many
Right.
layers. And a lot of the time I'm just like, if you're not going to honor the full story, you might as well just not cover it because you're going to
Yeah.
reduce it to something that it isn't. And the engagement is going to be superficial. And even I think even people in Khartoum are at fault of doing this because we love slogans. People will say
Hmm.
that for, but then when it comes to the actual work of shedding light on everything that is happening and amplifying the voices that have been speaking from that for a very long time, not just in Khartoum, but also in the diaspora and communities, in Jaliyas all over the world. There are people from different places who are doing a lot of work, but then the attention goes into people from Khartoum and the Khartoum experience, which is a lot of the time relatively minor compared to everything that is
Yeah,
that is happening
for
everywhere
sure.
else. And I think another thing that the social media did in the 2010s was that before that, a lot of us who were born and raised within Al-Bashir Sudan, and knew nothing else, didn't know that, I personally I didn't know what governments were doing for their people.
Mm.
I thought what we had was, the
Oh
standard.
wow.
And I think
Yeah.
for a lot of people, we were just taking what we could get from the government, and I feel it exposed us to so many more possibilities. And I don't think we realized how dirty we were being done until we actually compared it. And we were just like, there is no way. And especially because of the fact that through social media as well, a lot of the youth were playing the role of the government. Like, it would be autumn and then Nafir
For
would come together
sure.
and they'd like save everyone from facing the consequences of autumn, which happens at the exact same time every year, but somehow the government is never prepared.
Always
Shara
a surprise.
Hawadis, yeah, Shara Hawadis, and even like small things like neighborhood committees and people coming together to clean up yards and help people in the neighborhood and stuff like that. So when it was combined, I think all of these things combined, having first of all realizing we're being lied to, and we were having news deliberately withheld from us. In addition to
Hmm.
the fact that we were practically playing the role of a government, and then on top of that, the government that we did have that was useless was then actively sabotaging whatever work that the youth
Yes.
they shouldn't have been doing. We shouldn't have even been playing the role of government, providing public services in that way, but we were. And I think that is like all of these things coming together is what was the final straw. Like in 2018, like you said, in Adbara, when they decided to triple bread prices. How dare you triple bread prices when you're doing nothing? You're doing nothing
It's
as a
wild.
government. You're doing absolutely nothing. You're not providing transport or education or anything. And now you want to triple bread prices when we're already doing your job for you. I feel like that was the absolute final straw for people. Like, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had, I think social media allowed us to have the momentum to sustain it. I think before that, people
Hmm.
kind of, it takes a lot to organize a protest. It takes a lot to decide, we're
It
striking on
does.
this day. But people already had the networks there. Everyone was at least part of, I think at some point, everyone in Khartoum, if not everyone in Sudan, was either part of a resistance committee or a union, or even just like a group chat of revolutionaries that where, you would
Yeah.
get that we were striking on this day, we were doing civil disobedience on that day. And it allowed us kind of the momentum that we didn't have before when people would protest and they would crack down violently and then we would lose momentum naturally um because of the violence that we were
Yeah.
experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think those two, I mean, I think the social media organizing and mobilizing worked in tandem with the successive decline of
Hmm.
the country, right? It was, I
Hmm.
mean, I remember in 2013, I mean, even as late as 2016, those
Hmm.
were some pretty big protests, but still nothing compared to 2018. And those were organized and called for and mobilized through social media as well. But the government had an easier time cracking down on those protests because they were minor. I
Hmm.
use that word, I mean, relatively minor. But by 2018, people had learned from all of those experiences of organizing online,
Hmm.
right? Had built upon those experiences. And at the same time, the country was going to hell. I mean, tripling of bread prices, the standard of living is plummeting. People are struggling. There's also immense, at post 2016, I think things got even more difficult because now the government has in its sights young organizers, activists. It sees that there's a growing movement and it's hell bent on completely wiping it out. So there's a lot more security, there's tension, there's tension in the air. And so that just led to an explosion.
Hmm.
And I think, we credit social media a lot for how we were able to organize, but I'm so glad that you mentioned Nafir because we sort of dismiss that this is a part of the Sudanese um, personality, the Sudanese
Yeah.
culture, this idea of collective mobilizing, of mobilizing for your community in times of need.
Hmm.
Nafir was a group, but it's a concept. It's a concept that exists in Sudan, right? It's part of our culture of like I said, just a community coming together in times of floods, in whatever natural disaster or a community need to fill that gap in the absence of a government that should be doing that work, right? We've just, it's been ingrained in us because of successive governmental failures, right? Because of successive governments that don't care about us.
Hmm.
Um, and so seeing that turn into an organized group that does something at a time when I forget the year that Nafir came together. Um, I
Hmm.
think it was 20, I want to say it was 2011, but
Maybe.
again, time is a social construct. Um, that was the first time I saw Sudanese youth mobilize in a way that was so organized and so effective
Hmm.
and immediate. And you
Hmm.
see people with different skill sets coming together with the sole purpose of just wanting to help, right?
Hmm.
I mean, this was not a paid thing. It was just a call out that was made over social media. And you see people come in all capacities, organizing, project managers, people, graphic designers, people who are active on social media, volunteers who are on the ground distributing tents and whatever to help people. There were huge, very heavy rains, huge floods. The government was not equipped to handle it. People were dying. People were literally dying. Homes are destroyed, and youth came in to fill that gap.
Hmm.
Um, I think that experience of Nafir really solidified to me that we are capable
Hmm.
of building. We are capable of doing this for ourselves. And it also solidified to the government that we have a problem on our hands
Yeah.
because these youth are energized, they know how to organize, they came together seemingly out of nowhere. How did they do this? And let's destroy it because this could have other far reaching consequences for us. And by the time you get to the revolution, where people, like I said, have learned from all of these different organizing experiences, particularly online, and have fallen back on other, like I said, traditional ways of organizing, then you have this really successful movement that, side note, I really want to say that part of, like you said, Dinan, the flattening of the narrative by international media is happened during this revolution, where it became about the military overthrowing dictator Ahmed al-Bashir. After how many months? 4 months at least of intense protests, 9 months in total, I want to say, of a nationwide movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nationwide peaceful movement
Mm-hmm.
that we haven't really seen anywhere at that either at that level or at that in that form,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for it to be flattened to just, well, the military stepped in and overthrew Ahmed al-Bashir was infuriating to me
Yeah.
because it just dismissed and discounted all of that work and all of that revolutionary work, but also all of that innovative
Mm-hmm.
organizing that we were doing, or that people did. So I just had to say that
No,
because that
that's
really
such an
sits
important point. That is such an
on my
important point. I
spirit.
think sorry, did I interrupt you?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think when people flatten the narrative on Sudan, they're missing out on such an important opportunity to learn. Because right now, everyone's in despair. Everyone's just like, these systems aren't working. And that's a feeling that we felt and we sat with for maybe 10, 20 years. Like, we
Yeah,
felt that way for a long time. And I think what we learned is that the revolution did not by any means start at those protests. And it didn't start in December
no.
2018 either. It started
Hmm.
because we were so sick of the government, and then we turned towards the people. If you're working towards a power that is much larger than you, it's going to be very difficult for your voice to be heard. What we did, what the Sudanese youth did, was turn towards the people, see what the people needed, and begin tending to those needs. Being like, what can I
Yeah,
do? What can I do to attend to the immediate needs of my community? What can I do to make those ties so strong that none of us are left wanting? And then after that, once we have the ability to take care of each other, then we had the leverage, to go up against the power like that because there were so many of us. And I think people talk about the buzzword of community. I've seen people, well-meaning people in the West who try to organize, who try to um, sustain movements as well against the injustices that they're seeing. But I think what people miss out on is the innovation that you were talking about that the Sudanese people did. We banded together in a way that I have never, not in history books, not in, studying politics, not in movies, I've never seen anything like it before. We came together in a way that is sure social media was a tool, but like you said, this is something that is ingrained in us. I don't think anyone ever took care of Sudanese people. That's why we learned how to take care of each other. I don't think any of us
for
would wake up
sure.
and have the audacity to expect the government to take care of them. Like I
For
would
sure.
never, I would never ever in my life rely on a government to do something like that. I know that, a shout our best. Like there's no one who's taking care of me
Yeah,
but the people. And we learned to do that. And then that translated into the way that we use social media. I also think it's important to note that the al-Bashir's regime was so, so, so notoriously and insistently old school. They refused to innovate. They refused to go paperless. They refused to update the curriculum. They refused to do all those things. And that ended up shooting
yeah.
them in the foot because they didn't know what we were
They
doing
couldn't
online.
keep up.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
could
they couldn't keep
close
up.
down Nadi al-Hilla, they could close down community clubs, they could, shut down university campuses early. They could even shut down universities, suspend education for a while to make sure people don't congregate. But they could not fathom what was happening online because they had insisted on not developing, on taking all of the resources that they had and either directing it towards embezzlement or committing war crimes in the peripheries of
For
Sudan,
sure.
which is how they ended up
I,
in that situation. But
yeah.
yeah,
I
taking, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
But no, because I wanna ask, I wanna jump into a different topic. So you should, if you have a piece, you should say it. And I know it's important.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that just to like confirm what you said, that they, you know, certainly during the revolution, the beginning of the revolution, they were not prepared at
Mhm.
all for the fact that organizing on social media was translating on the ground. I
Yeah.
think, especially when we talk about, even now, like in a Western context, when we talk about organizing, people are always like, well, this is just happening on social media. What are we doing? There's a disconnect that we didn't see in Sudan. There was a disconnect between the online activism and the on the ground activism and the IRL activism that we didn't see in Sudan. And I think that's what the government was banking on, even when they were seeing the buzz on social media and they were seeing the people talking about and the narrative grow of like, we need to protest, we need to revolt, blah blah blah. They were they were in turn pushing the narrative of, this is just kids being kids online, right? Nothing is going to happen. They didn't think that it was going to translate on the ground. But like I said, those things were working in tandem.
Yeah.
Our movement online was working in tandem with our movement on the ground. And that's what made it successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to
Absolutely.
push
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And you could see it when they would cut out the internet and people would be on bicycles
Right.
distributing
Right.
the
I mean, they
information.
they finally learned. Oh, that was the other thing I would say. The other thing was they were so taken aback by the amount of information in terms of like live footage and video that was coming out of the protests, of the sit-ins. They were not prepared for that. And I think the first time the government truly caught up is when they cut off the internet, when they decided to cut off the internet. Because then that, and this happened even before. I think this happened in 2016 because that was the first time they were like, oh wait, images are coming out of Sudan now. Things that people, if you're just talking, like I said, if you just tweet, like you said, if you're just tweeting in Sudanese Arabic, nobody's paying attention to you except your own little audience, right? This is not hitting on a global scale. But in 2016, when they shot those kids in the middle of the street for protesting, high school kids were gunned down in the middle of the street, and there were photos of them dead in the middle of the street. And people had uploaded them to Facebook and Twitter. And folks were starting to pay attention. They got scared. And so in response, they cut off the internet. And so then by the revolution in 2019 and the June 3rd massacre, when, they attacked the Khartoum sit-in to disperse it and killed hundreds of people, tortured hundreds of people, whatever, it was a massacre. The internet was shut off then because that was also being live streamed. And so I think that was the moment where the government sort of finally caught up to the to today to the reality of how technology is pushing this movement and how it is a hindrance and like a danger to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And all they could do at the time was shut off the internet. I don't think they
Right.
had the power to fight back. But moving us from the past sort of more to the present now, thinking about how much has changed, because I think we're up against much more tech savvy enemies now, or
Yeah.
both the RSF and the Sudanese army have since learned about the internet because they needed to. And I just wanted to, as someone who is on social media and who uses it as a tool to collate information to archive, how has that changed now that the RSF and the SAF in turn are able to sabotage us online as well as in real life?
Mhm. I mean, I certainly think like you said, they've invested a lot over the last 4 or 5 years into um, having an online presence and having a big enough online presence to be able to um, sway the narrative or twist it at the very least cause confusion to people. And out of the two, I think out of the two between the Sudanese military and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF is definitely more advanced in that capacity. They have spent a lot of money and they have a lot of outside support, I'll say, to uh, to be able to have that presence and to be able to have insight into how people organize online and what you can do to sort of throw a wrench in that, right? Um, so right now, what we're seeing is a very well-oiled propaganda machine on the RSF side. And it's unfortunate for many reasons, but I think it's unfortunate for SAF, for the Sudanese military, because they're so far behind. I mean, they have the people's conditional support at the very least, their conditional support, if not their outright support, but they have the people's conditional support, but it's not, but they're losing the battle
Mhm.
online because, like I said, the RSF has this such a well-oiled propaganda machine. Um, from verified accounts, the fact that Hemeti, the leader of the RSF, has an online presence, a very clear, branded online presence. I mean, as of even last month, he has periodic statements that he puts out. He's talking to the people, well, he says the Sudanese people, but really his forces
Yeah.
and the international community, right? He's talking actually fully to the international community. All of these statements that he puts out are crafted in a very deliberate way
Mhm.
to put out a certain image of, I'm the person you should be backing. I am saying all the buzzwords, like you said, Dinan, of
Mhm.
um, democracy and freedom and the revolution, all these buzzwords that should, on paper, if you know nothing about Sudan and you read his statement, you're thinking, oh, this is a dude to back
Mhm.
because he's got it right. He's giving us a a West friendly
Yeah.
perspective, right? Meanwhile, SAF is still in the Stone Ages, right?
Yeah.
Their statements are few and far between. There's no clear brand, there's no clear voice
Mhm.
speaking for the Sudanese military online. Um, and it's the English, even if if you're taking these statements that are
Mhm.
sometimes uh, published in English, this language is nowhere near
Mhm.
the language used by the RSF. It's If you're just looking at it from an online perspective, SAF is losing,
Yeah.
right? And that's a thing uh, that is really unfortunate for us as people who, like I said, may have that conditional support for them, and we are following the things online, and we know how important image is in things like this, right? War is all about what you present. Well, on the ground, nobody's seeing anything, right?
Mhm.
There are no media outlets that are broadcasting from the battlefield like they would be in other places. We
Mhm.
don't have the privilege or the luxury of having imagery come out of Sudan that are showing you what's what, right?
Mhm.
All you have is online. All you have is what's being presented online,
Mhm.
and what's being presented online. Uh, with especially with how these social media apps work now.
Mhm.
The fact that you pay for a check mark, that your stuff gets pushed through the algorithm because you're a paying customer, as opposed to the rest of us who are just using the thing for free, and our tweets don't get out past our little bubble, um, or it's very difficult to do so. You
Mhm.
have these very dangerous forces that have the access and the opportunity and the teams to push out their narrative much, much more than than the reality, than the truth. And so it ends up being online. It's really disheartening at times to
Mhm.
see that um, however much we do, we are contending with forces much stronger, much richer, much with much more access than we have. And with also, it's not just about them having the teams, it's also the bots, and it's also, they have uh, a collection of supporters. I can't for sure say if they are paid agents or not, for example, right? But certainly they have a legion of supporters that are pushing out this narrative on both ends. I
Yeah.
mean, the RSF has bots and supporters that are pushing out their narrative. On the other hand, you have SAF certainly doesn't have the organized infrastructure, but it does have a very large group of supporters that are pushing out a narrative, right? A
Mhm.
narrative that works for for SAF, and
Mhm.
also muddles the truth and confuses it in a much different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, as you said, so we're up against maybe like three enemies here. So we've got the RSF, and who are backed by, they have a PR company, they are being funded by a lot of foreign powers. And they knew that if they wanted to tackle the Sudanese people, they needed to tackle the youth. And if they needed to tackle the youth, they needed to understand how social media worked. Um, and then there's the Sudanese army who are trying their best, they're very willing, not so much able. And I think we've always had things like Jidad Electroni, like people who they position to
Oh
spread
yeah,
misinformation.
yeah.
We've always had that. But that's not enough anymore because, social media has advanced. And then there's a sort of like neutral, I will say, effect that is coming from the fact that social media itself has stopped being about human beings interacting on a virtual platform. It used to be so simple. It used to be just about how, how you guys meet in, the neighborhood to talk. Now you can do that on a virtual basis from your own homes. It started being about this, attention economy, about
Mm,
people getting money from engagement and then engagement being monetized. And I think, like you said, the fact that you can pay for certain features now, the fact that it used to be, like I said, a very simple system where everything was chronological. If you posted at 6:30 and I posted
yeah,
at 32, people would see your post first. But now if you post at 6:32 and you use three keywords and you've got Twitter Premium and have promoted the tweet, then people will see it regardless of what has happened. And I think that
definitely.
is very it's very harmful in the short and in the long term. I think in the short term, when there's urgent needs, like when we used to tweet out, there's irtikaz fi shara, like there's a raid at a certain street, or there's these are the safe pathways, or someone needs B plus blood at this and this hospital.
Mm,
There's no way you can do that now because you do not see things in
yeah,
chronological order. You're lucky if you're even seeing the people that you follow. So
for
there's
sure.
absolutely no way you're trying to find the safe pathways and you're getting ads for Candy Crush. Like it is so difficult to navigate
Yeah,
social
it's
media now.
dystopian, really.
Yeah, it is
It's
incredibly dystopian.
dystopian. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That has been one of the major struggles, especially for somebody like me whose job it's become to collect the news and disseminate it as it happens.
Mhm.
I mean, there's no way to do it. There's no way to do it. I see tweets from 4 days ago, not
Mm.
the tweets from the people I follow who are
Yeah.
that are happening now. That are being posted now. Um, and like you said, and that's still a major challenge. The idea that people have urgent needs. People need to evacuate. People need safe passages. People need uh, to find out where to find medication. All of these things are urgent needs that are not being met, or it's very difficult for them to be met when you can't get the call out fast enough, when you can't get it when it first comes out, when you have to, manually send it to people to disseminate it for you because they're not going to see it on the timeline.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that's like I know that we're a year on in the war, but these are still things that are everyday happening. These are needs that are everyday happening, that are everyday being, these call outs are being made every day. This is not slowing down. If nothing, it's getting worse because as the war progresses and takes more time, I mean, those needs just grow. And
Mhm.
if we can't I mean, we've just been so reliant on social media to get us connected in that way, to get us to be able to help people in that way. And the way that these apps are set up now makes it almost impossible.
Yeah, yeah. And the fact that someone can, because it's become a marketplace for attention rather than a way for people to engage, people can buy it now. Like I remember when
Yeah.
I was seeing these two things happen I was seeing the same thing happen and I was seeing it from two angles. I was seeing, the average person in London and how they were reacting to the news that Twitter could be deleted. And then I was thinking about it from the perspective of being Sudanese. These are the some of the only archives that we have, and
Yes.
they were at risk of being erased from the internet, erased from history practically, because we could start today and it would take us probably 10 years to collate the evidence and
For sure.
differentiate between what is real and what is propaganda, and we probably wouldn't even be able to do it unless you because of the way Sudanese society works. I know news is verified because I know who tweeted it. If I know
Hmm.
someone's my best friend's uncle's cousin's sister, then I know that that's verifiable. We don't have like people with verified ticks or people who I consider to be verified
Right.
sources. There's only that. So only people who know people can confirm what is real and what isn't. Even when news come out and people need to verify it, you wait for someone who you know to say that they know someone who
Mhm.
verified it. It's so difficult, even writing about Sudan, to have like what they call like to cite it with primary sources. There's everything is word of
Mhm.
mouth, and the word of
Yeah.
mouth is verified by further word of mouth. So it is very, very difficult. And going back to what you said about how Hemeti is using social media and those RSF statements coming out, it is so incredibly chilling seeing that happen because he's it's lying and it's gaslighting, and it is an altered
Fully,
reality. Like they're tweeting about an
fully.
altered reality, something that we all know isn't the truth, but they're tweeting it with such confidence. And it's not even like I'm arguing a point. No, I'm speaking as if this is reality. And the world is going to believe me because I have a verified badge. I have a really nice logo. I have a PR firm behind me, and I'm using really eloquent language. Like you can't even say that, a GPT put this together. No, I have copywriters on the payroll
Yeah.
and they're writing my propaganda. And I guess my question to you and my question to the world is what can we do to counter all of those things that are happening? Is it time for us to maybe, I'm thinking as someone who operates within tech, someone who works in the field and understands the algorithms, if it's time for us to branch out and have our own platforms, but then that isolates us further. So
Yeah.
I guess my question to you as someone who practically works on these platforms every day, and like you said, your job has become to collate these news and put them together. What have you seen being done, and what have you done to sort of counter all of these weapons that are being formed against us?
This is a tough question because I personally believe we haven't found the thing yet that is
Yeah.
that to counteract this.
Mhm.
Um, but I wanted to say, the sad part is when you compare, I mean, the sad part is that these very well articulated, beautifully cleansed, whatever
Mhm.
statements that are
Mhm.
coming out at the same time as video footage recorded by RSF forces themselves of absolute, heinous crimes being committed
Mhm.
against civilians, right? It's There's an expression in Sudan that says if two people tell you that your head is missing, touch it,
Yeah.
right? It's really that. If you see these statements and we are sharing to you on the other end, Sudanese people are sharing these irrefutable
Mhm.
uh, uh, examples or footage, evidence, whatever, of the RSF's crimes, for example, of what's happening to us. It make you stop for a second and think, well, hold on. I see what this guy is saying, but I'm also seeing this, right? Why are we having to contend? Why is the reality,
Mhm.
the disaster that is the reality, having to contend with a a 500, 700 word statement
Mhm.
that doesn't reflect it at all?
Mhm.
It's are you going to believe what your eyes see or what you're reading online? I think that's that's really where it is. I don't
Mhm.
have an answer to your question as to what we can do to counteract past. I think again, we're outmanned and we are outgunned, proverbially, and and one can argue literally,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I mean, we're out of our pay grade. This is beyond my pay grade, right?
Mhm.
I don't have the money, the backing to be able to counteract a machine,
Mhm.
right? A full fledged, thought out strategy. I'm just a person, like we said before in the beginning. I'm just a person who's doing this because I feel compelled to do it because nobody else is doing it, and I see on the other end what's being pushed out.
Mhm.
Uh, Past us, um, actively, deliberately, counteracting whatever narrative by saying our truth, by saying what
Mhm.
we see on the ground and what we experience. I have no idea. I have no idea how we can overcome that.
Yeah. I think there's just thinking about this as you were speaking, I think we there's because we're here and we're stuck and the inertia is just keeping us where we're at. We either go back to pen and paper and communicating in real life and going back to underground real life movements, or I think this is something that people who work in the field of tech in Sudan need to be thinking about. Very often people will think that,
Hmm.
Sudan is apolitical and these algorithms are just algorithms and, we don't really, it doesn't really affect people in the real world. And there's a deliberate gap that is created and a vacuum that is created between technology and people. And I think this is a call out to everyone. If your parents force you to study engineering, now is your time to step up and
Right.
help us come up with
It's
a
your time to
solution.
shine.
This is your time to shine because we need to be able to counter this. We countered this the first time by being more innovative than our enemy, and we need to be more innovative than our enemy. If that means that we go back to doing things, go back to ground zero and start doing things on the ground, then we go back to ground zero, start doing these things on the ground. I think it's very important to engage fully. Like I think that, engagement gets us far, but I don't think it gets us deep enough when people, are making very, very, very snazzy posters and they're able to make it one line and one thing I hate, which is when they sort of just post like a brutal picture and then say pray for Sudan. But you need to explain the
Uh,
context to people. You
yeah.
need people to sit down and understand fully what's happening. That is enough to compel people to come and sit down, but you need to have a story to tell them when they sit down. And I think people were asking in the Q&A about, what can be done. I think that is what needs to be done. I think we need to be having real life conversations. It's not enough to create something that is easily postable on social media. We can't work with social media on social media terms. This is not meant to be bite-sized.
Hmm.
It's not going to be digestible, and it's not meant to
Mm-mm.
because it's a story that
No.
has been 30 years in the making, if not 100 years in the making, and it's something that will continue to be relevant. Now, when we're in a state where the world is falling apart, nobody's happy with what the world is at. Now is the time for us to sit down and learn these stories. And coming to events like this, even though this is only an hour, I think this can give you more context than any infographic that you will ever read. You need to be
For
interacting with
sure.
you need to be driving people to have these conversations. You need to understand it for yourself so that when your friends ask you, you can speak to them. It's not enough for this to trend on social media. I remember when, the world was people were turning their profile pictures blue. And then you'd ask people why they turned their profile pictures blue, and they had no idea. They had
They
no
had
idea
no idea.
behind it. They
Had
were just
no
doing it because
idea.
everyone was
Yeah.
doing it. And that upset me quite a lot. I was just like, you need to either genuinely engage or don't engage at all. You need to understand the story fully and understand what you can learn from it and what you can apply from it in your real life and what you can do against your own oppression that's happening in your country. You wanna help the Sudanese people figure out how to stand up to your own governments that are putting you in a very
Ooh.
tough situation. That is something that you can do for the Sudanese people because it's all one fight. It's all one fight.
I was saying this to somebody the other day. I was saying the most interesting thing about the this newfound awakening vis-a-vis what's happening in Palestine, and this global awakening to the Palestinian struggle, is that people in free countries are now realizing that they are not free, that their governments that they vote for do not work for them,
Mhm,
and that their voices do not matter. This
mhm.
is something that us in the third world, the people who
Yeah.
are in oppressed countries, have always known, right? What you said earlier, Dinan, I never thought that a government should be doing anything for me because that's
Yeah.
how I grew up. And yet, fully, like, people are now realizing that this is just a facade, and so what are you going to do about it, right?
Yeah.
At this point, it becomes, what are you going to do about it? Our struggles are all connected.
Mhm.
um, and what the one thing I would add is seek the information out. I think we've become so reliant on the algorithm bringing things to us, even with this, even now, like with the Palestinian cause, people are getting it without looking for it, right? It's just
Mhm.
coming to them because of the sheer volume of people talking about it and discussing it, and it being all over the news and whatever. So they have relied on the social media algorithm to just bring it to them, bring
Yeah.
whatever information to them. That doesn't work for every cause. That's not going to be the same for every struggle. And so, if you are truly trying to understand what's happening in Sudan, for example, you need to seek that information out. You can't just sit back and wait for the algorithm to bring it to you. It will not,
Yeah.
right? It will not.
Yeah.
So yeah, seek out the information, seek out and genuinely engage.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And if you don't, you will either be bombarded by content that is not meaningful and you're not engaging with it fully, but you're exhausted because of it. You're going to be in this echo chamber where you're only getting devastating news and not getting an angle on what you can do. I don't think a lot of the content on social media, at least what the algorithm will deliver to you, won't be anything that is substantial. It's not a call to action. It's just look what's happening in the world. The world is
Hmm.
falling apart. And that's it. You just watch as the world falls apart rather than engaging meaningfully with
Right.
people doing the work. I always tell people this, if you develop a strong understanding of what is happening, you'll know what you need to do. You will find a place in the movement, whether it's locally, whether it's globally, whether it's for Sudan or Palestine or Congo. The minute you get a full understanding, everyone has a role. Artists have a role. Like I said, people in computer science, people who are navigating the tech space have a role to play in this. Everyone can do something, and
For
we don't
sure.
all need to be doing the same thing. We don't need to all be, making infographics and sharing information in that way. It is very crucial work, but if we're all doing it, then someone needs to be, so that means there's a part of it that's not being held up. So
Right.
I think my advice to the people in the Q&A who are asking about what can we do for Sudan in this time is meaningfully engaged. That could look like going to, I've seen a lot of art exhibitions happening to go in depth about not just what's happening, but also how it feels and what the Sudanese people, the lived experience of the Sudanese people who have had to leave Sudan is now. And that is a way to meaningfully engage. That means a lot more than sharing something on your story or just reading a series of tweets that just leave you fatigued and confused about. But yeah, that's my piece. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think like you said, Dinan, helping doesn't just mean sharing the information. Um, it also means getting to know Sudan and Sudanese people beyond what's
Mhm.
happening to them right now, right? I think part of the reason why um, people are part of the reason why we're not reaching
Mhm.
folks in the way that we should be. Oh, and what's happening in Sudan is not really affecting people in the way that it should be, is because people don't know anything about Sudan. There's
Yeah.
no emotional attachment to the
Mhm.
country or the people, right? If this happened in Italy, we all know pasta and pizza. Oh my God, right? Like we would be moved in some capacity because we
Yeah.
have some sort of superficial, yes, albeit, but that we have some sort of connection to that place, even if we haven't been there before. We know something about them beyond the tragedy that's happening to them. But for Sudan, that's not the case,
Yeah.
right? Maybe some people in watching us right now have this is the first time they're hearing any Sudanese person speak or seeing any Sudanese person, right? That's totally possible, right? So I think engaging with Sudan outside of this is part of it. Because the more you learn about a people, the more interesting things you find out about a people, the more of an emotional connection you create with them, even if it's not on a personal, individual level. The more, and then when you see stuff coming out of Sudan, there's something there that triggers something in you, right? But if
Mhm.
there's no emotional attachment in the first place, then no matter how much tragedy you see, it's not going to affect you. It's not going to move you to engage or help or reach out to your representatives or donate because there's a wall there, right?
Mhm.
So engaging, even just engaging with Sudan outside of this war, outside of tragedy, learning about our history, our culture, our people, grab a Sudanese person at an event and have a conversation with them. Make a Sudanese friend,
Yeah, make a
anything
Sudanese
helps.
friend for real. And when you make one Sudanese friend, you're gonna make 10. So just start with one.
Yeah,
Start with one and
then
they
you're
will
just in the
introduce you to all their
community. At
cousins.
that point, you're in the community. You're coming to the cookout.
Exactly, exactly. No, yeah, I absolutely agree. And I also think it's just time to, if there's anything that you can learn from the Sudanese movement, is that if you feel like there's a gap in what the government is doing, there's a lot more that you can do. Do the sit-ins by all means, do the sit-ins, do the protests, and continue in the resistance, but also figure out a way to solve it. It will only make you stronger. It will only make everything else that you're doing to resist against a government that you feel is unfair to you. It will only make you better at doing that. Turn towards the people and figure out what the people need and figure out what the people can
Or,
do for each other. You need to start speaking to your neighbors. You need to start getting to know the people around you. Otherwise, there's no way out of this. Like we actually only
yep.
have each other. And um that I think is a very, very important lesson from Sudanese people and shifting that lens of, pray for Sudan into what can I learn from Sudan? Because what we did was substantial. What we did was huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's why global powers had to band together to break us down because we were a bunch of, a youth and who made that happen. And we alarmed the entire world because of what we
And
proved.
we continue to do it. It's
Yeah.
been 11 months of war, and the people at the forefront, at the front lines of humanitarian
Mhm.
response are youth. are the people themselves, are the war victims themselves, who have banded together to feed their communities, to heal and treat their communities, to evacuate their communities, to speak about their own struggle. Like, what we're doing right now is beyond conceivable to me, that people in Sudan have the energy, that young people have the energy and are being actively suppressed and targeted and arrested and killed for caring for their communities in a time of war, within the complete absence of government and a complete disregard for civilian life on both sides. If nothing else, learn that. Learn the power of carrying your community and what that can do for you. If it can sustain people in a war, imagine what it will do in peacetime.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for this. I don't know if Kenia is going to come back and close this out, or if I should. There she is. Hi, Kenia.
No,
No,
thank
thank you.
you so much. Oh my God, I was over here taking notes. That's why it took me a second to get back. Thank you, Sada. Thank you, Dinan. Thank you, everyone who came out to view today. If you check in the chat, I've been sending all kinds of links to learn more about Sada and Dinan's work, and also learn more about our Logic Speaker series. We'll be having these meetings every week. From now on, it'll be from 12 to 1 p.m. EST. So yeah, meet us next week around the same time for our next panel, which will be with Petra Molnar and Wael Karsifi on surviving migration in the age of surveillance. But just thank you again, Sara and Dinan, and
Thank
have a good
you.
one. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Oh, also, this is going to be recorded too, so you'll be able to watch the recording if you want to watch back and stuff. But yeah. All right. Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.